On July 25, 1483, two boys stood in the garden of the Tower of London, drawing back their bows and watching arrows slice through summer air. Edward was 12 years old. His brother Richard was 9. They laughed as their arrows found their marks, unaware that within weeks they would vanish from history itself, leaving behind a mystery so dark that 5 centuries later we still cannot speak its full truth. Because here is what will chill you to your very core. We know exactly who wanted them dead. We know who had the means. We know who claimed the throne they were born to inherit. And yet, after generations of investigations, after centuries of accusations and confessions and discoveries, we still cannot prove what happened in those final, terrifying hours when 2 children became the most dangerous people in all of England simply by drawing breath. Picture the scene inside those fortress walls in late July of that same year. Edward V lies awake beside his bed, his physician, Dr. John Argentine, watching with growing unease as the boy seeks confession daily, as though he believes death is facing him. Think about that for just a moment. A 12-year-old child, supposedly safe within royal accommodations, so utterly certain of his approaching murder that he prepares his soul for the afterlife. His younger brother Richard, Duke of York, had joined him only weeks before on June 16, 1483, pulled from their mother's desperate arms at Westminster Abbey under promises of safety that now taste like ash. One chronicler would later write with grim certainty that the boy left his mother never to see her again. Their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, had fought to keep Richard with her in sanctuary, had resisted every pressure and plea, until finally she surrendered him to men who swore on their honor he would be protected. She must have known, somewhere deep in her heart, that she was sending her youngest son to his grave. While those boys shot their arrows and played their games, while they watched the world through tower windows and felt the walls closing in around them, their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was executing a political coup so masterful and so ruthless that it would transform the entire kingdom in a matter of weeks. On June 13, 1483, during what should have been a routine council meeting at the Tower, Richard suddenly turned on Lord Hastings and accused him of treason. Within an hour, Hastings was dead, beheaded on a log outside the building so swiftly they did not even have time to construct a proper scaffold. His blood was still wet on the stones when Richard's agents began spreading a story that would shatter 2 young lives forever. They declared that King Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville had been invalid all along, that the dead king had supposedly been promised to another woman first, making every child of that union illegitimate in the eyes of God and law. With one carefully crafted lie, Richard transformed his nephews from rightful heirs to the throne into bastards with no claim at all. On June 26, 1483, Parliament formally offered Richard the crown. He accepted with what witnesses described as reluctance, though whether that hesitation was genuine or merely performance, we will never truly know. By July 6 he was King Richard III, crowned and anointed, sitting on a throne that by every law of inheritance should have belonged to the boy still shooting arrows in the Tower garden. And those 2 children, Edward and Richard, they were no longer princes of the realm, they were problems that needed solving. The historical record shows us something truly chilling in the weeks that followed. After Richard's coronation, sightings of the boys grew increasingly rare. The Great Chronicle of London gives us our last confirmed glimpse of them alive, noting that the boys were seen shooting and playing in the garden of the Tower sundry times. But then, as the Italian diplomat Dominic Mancini reported in an account written that very same year for the French court, they were withdrawn to the inner apartments of the Tower proper. Mancini's words contain a detail that should make your blood run cold. He describes how the boys were seen more and more rarely behind the bars and windows, until at length they ceased to appear altogether. Imagine that image for a moment. 2 children watching the world through iron bars, their faces appearing less and less frequently until one day they simply were not there anymore. No announcement, no explanation, just absence where there had been life. By autumn of 1483, barely 3 months after Richard took the crown, Mancini reported that already there was a suspicion that they had been done away with. The rumors spread through London like plague, whispered in taverns and shouted in streets, until the question everyone was asking became impossible to ignore: who would murder 2 children? And perhaps more importantly, who could? The answer to that question would haunt England for centuries and create a mystery that even now, even with all our modern methods and investigations, remains stubbornly, maddeningly unsolved. King Richard III controlled the Tower where the boys had vanished. He had declared them illegitimate. He sat upon a throne that rightfully belonged to his eldest nephew. Every moment those children drew breath, they represented a threat to his rule that no amount of legal maneuvering could fully eliminate. Even branded as bastards, public opinion could shift like wind. Loyalists could rally around them. In the brutal mathematics of medieval power, their deaths made perfect, horrible sense. The circumstantial evidence against Richard is overwhelming enough to convict him in any court of public opinion. He never produced the boys to counter the spreading rumors of their deaths. He never blamed another soul for their disappearance. When rebellions rose against him using the prince's names as rallying cries, he could have ended those uprisings instantly by parading the boys before the crowds to prove they lived. He did not. Foreign observers were even less subtle than English chroniclers in their accusations. In January of 1484, the Chancellor of France publicly declared that Edward IV's children have been killed with impunity, and the crown has been transferred to their murderer. This was not whispered gossip shared in shadows. This was international condemnation spoken in open court. But there is more, something that brings us closer to the truth than any contemporary accusation ever could. In 1502, nearly 2 decades after the boys disappeared, a man named Sir James Tyrrell was arrested for treason against Henry VII. Under interrogation in the Tower itself, the very fortress where the princes had vanished, Tyrrell allegedly confessed to murdering them on King Richard III's direct orders. According to this confession, Tyrrell had recruited 2 men, Miles Forrest and John Dighton, to carry out the actual killing. The method they chose was suffocation. They waited until the boys were asleep, then smothered them with their own pillows, pressing down until small lungs could draw no more breath. After confirming the children were dead, they buried the bodies at the foot of a staircase within the tower, covering them with stones to hide what they had done. Skeptics will rightfully point out that we do not have Tyrrell's actual confession in his own hand, only second-hand accounts written years later by men with their own agendas. But in 2024, researchers made a discovery that those skeptics cannot easily explain away. In a will dated 1516, they found mention of a gold chain that had belonged to Edward V himself. Where was this incredibly valuable piece of the boy king's personal jewelry? This intimate possession that should have been kept as a sacred relic of a murdered child? It was in the possession of Sir James Tyrrell's own family. Lady Margaret Keppel, Tyrrell's sister-in-law, left instructions in her will that the chain should go to her son, describing it plainly as his father's chain, which was young King Edward V's. How did the alleged murderer's family end up with the victim's jewelry? One theory sends ice through the veins. It was taken as proof that the deed had been done, payment for services rendered in blood. In 1674, nearly 200 years after the princes vanished, workmen renovating the Tower of London made a discovery that seemed to confirm the darkest rumors. Beneath a staircase, they found a wooden box containing 2 small skeletons, bones that appeared to belong to children of approximately the right ages. Given the persistent legend that the princes had been buried at the foot of stairs, these remains were immediately assumed to be Edward and Richard. King Charles II had them interred in Westminster Abbey in an ornate urn bearing the princes' names, as though the case was finally closed. But in 1933, when the urn was opened and the bones examined by experts of that era, the findings were far less conclusive than anyone hoped. The analysis suggested 2 children, one around 10 years old and one around 12. But the examination could not determine their sex with certainty, could not confirm their identity, and relied on methods we now consider primitive and unreliable. Modern scientists have pointed out numerous problems with that 1933 analysis, noting that age estimates could be off by several years and that without DNA testing, we cannot even confirm these are the bodies of children from the 15th century, much less specifically Edward V and Richard, Duke of York. The solution seems agonizingly obvious. Test the bones with modern forensic techniques, compare the DNA to known descendants of the Yorkist bloodline, and finally give these children their names back. But here is the source of profound frustration for historians and investigators alike. Authorities will not allow it. The Church of England and the Crown have repeatedly refused requests to re-examine the remains, citing religious and ethical concerns about disturbing royal graves, and so we are left in this maddening position, where potential proof of the prince's fate sits in Westminster Abbey just beyond the reach of modern science, close enough to touch but forever forbidden. Those bones could answer our questions once and for all, could finally bring peace to a mystery that has haunted us for 500 years. Or they could deepen the mystery immeasurably if they turn out to belong to someone else entirely, 2 different children whose identities are equally lost to time. The Tower of London still stands today, transformed from fortress and prison into a place where tourists walk freely through gates that once locked children inside to die. Thousands of visitors pause each year at the Bloody Tower, where tradition says the princes met their end. The spot where they played their final games is marked on maps. The staircase where bones were found is dutifully noted in guidebooks, but the tower keeps its secrets locked in stone, and stone walls do not speak no matter how many questions we ask them. Somewhere within those ancient walls, on some long ago night that history has erased, 2 boys disappeared. Whether they died quickly at an assassin's hands or slowly from deliberate neglect, whether they somehow escaped to live anonymous lives in exile or were coldly executed in their sleep, we may never know with absolute certainty. What we do know is this: 2 children who should have been kings became the most dangerous people in England simply by existing. And someone decided that their deaths were worth more than their lives. The princes and the tower remind us that history is not always neat, that some mysteries resist every attempt at solution no matter how desperately we dig. They remind us that power corrupts absolutely, that children have always been casualties when ambitious men fight over crowns, that even royal blood offers no protection when thrones hang in the balance, and perhaps most hauntingly, they remind us that some truths can be lost forever, buried so deep that not even centuries of investigation can bring them back to light. Edward and Richard did not just disappear from the Tower of London that summer in 1483. They disappeared from history itself, leaving only questions and shadows and an ache that refuses to heal even after 500 years.